Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's special UDA webinar on conquering the 3 most common objections to software adoption by construction teams. My name is Holly Gibson, Senior Product Specialist here at UDA Technologies.
My name is Jordan Davis, also a Senior Product Specialist here at UDA Technologies, and we are really excited today to bring to you something that's a little different than some of our webinars we've been running in a previous series. Today we're going to be bringing lessons that we've learned helping construction teams all across the world in over 80 countries at this point. And really, we're going to be sharing things that we've learned and ways to overcome common challenges to adopting software, specifically ConstructionOnline. We have a lot of lessons and a lot of things to share, and we're excited to bring those lessons to you today.
Absolutely. Managing and implementing a project management system can be a little bit intimidating, but we all know it can make your team more accountable, more informed, more successful day to day. But they may not always agree, or it may be that you need to try a few things to really help them be successful. And that's what today's webinar is all about. Getting your team on board is important in terms of how you approach managing your projects and setting yourself and your team up for success from the very start. So we're going to go over what we've learned in terms of, common roadblocks, common challenges, and then also solutions, really effective solutions for getting your team on board.
Now, of course, as we work through our topics today, we're pretty certain that you have questions or challenges that you've encountered working with your teams or really learning how to make the most out of your software tools. And we'd love to hear different challenges that you've had or questions that you have for us, ways that we could potentially help out as we move through today. Now, to that end, our colleague Sydney Dorsey is joining us today on the keyboard. She'll be flagging questions as they come in. If you will take a look at the GoToWebinar panel, you'll find a section titled Questions. This is where you can submit questions to Holly and myself as we work through today. We would love to be able to answer your questions, and we should have some time at the end today to really spend some time addressing those questions as they come in. So please do send questions as you think of them today. And like we said, Sydney is more than happy to begin flagging those questions and directing them to us.
So we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Now, as we get started, and Jordan, like you mentioned, ConstructionOnline is being used by over 650,000 users all over the world, managing over $80 billion in projects every day. And we've been so lucky to be able to work with so many of you and hear about not only your challenges, but your solutions and things that have worked really well in terms of getting your team on board. So we are excited to talk about what those successful strategies look like. So some of the things you'll hear from us today are things like how to define clear goals and objectives, really talk about what you want to achieve with your team, how to increase buy-in by really communicating benefits to them. How is this going to help them out day to day? The importance of things like comprehensive training, ongoing support provided by your wonderful team here at UDA Technologies, as well as open communication and feedback from your own wonderful teams there in your office. So as we jump into those, Jordan, let's talk a little bit about the 3 most common challenges that we really see people facing when they're trying to get their team on board using a new software.
Yeah, Holly, we're in a really interesting spot, I would say. In a lot of cases, those that are joining us today, they've worked with maybe one or a few teams in their time in the industry. We've worked with thousands and thousands and thousands of teams, and so we've really had an opportunity to start to pull together really common overlaps, whether you're working with small scale teams, whether you're working with national teams that are spread across different offices. It's funny in some cases how the challenges seem to repeat and echo no matter the team, no matter the group of people. And we think that we have a really interesting and easy to remember set of challenges to share. We call those the 3 Ps. In this case, the 3 main challenges to really making the most out of the software that you'd be using is starts with the people inside of the team. I mean, this one is just a no-brainer. I feel like a lot of what we're covering today is going to come back to people at the heart. But we think that we've highlighted a few characteristics and different types of people and different situations you'll encounter, and we have some interesting strategies to overcome those challenges.
That's right. So you think about those 3 Ps. And remember this, guys, because this will be something you'll want to come back to as we're talking about the solutions and as you're really looking for solutions with your own team, because this is what you really need to evaluate. The people and how you can help them, processes that your company has put in place or maybe not yet, and then the priorities that you have day to day. So when we think about the people, this is a really fun part of the discussion for me, Jordan, and it's one of the things that I love most about what I get to do here at UDA is I get to work with so many different types of people. So what that leaves me is a couple of takeaways. One, these are some of the most important components for a successful project are really the people involved. But each of those people are bringing their own strengths and their own challenges to the table. So you guys listen and think, does any of this sound familiar in your team where maybe you have an industry veteran? I found that often that person is maybe a superintendent or an estimator who has a ton of industry experience, really, really knowledgeable, great at what they do, has experience handling just about any situation that you could throw at him or her, but maybe is a little bit afraid of technology or a little bit resistant to perhaps changing the way things are done. Or sometimes we see someone who's a little bit more comfortable with technology, but maybe like a bookkeeper or office manager who's really, really rigid, someone who has they know the way they want things done. They have a process in place. They have, boxes that they're needing to check today, and that it's really rigid. I see this a lot on the bookkeeping side of things where these individuals are, again, so talented at what they do and have really come up with some systems that work well within their narrow area of focus, but don't necessarily always work as well for the rest of the team. So you have to have a little bit of willingness to change there.
Yeah, and of course, the last point here is maybe the frazzled or let's say, the company owner who's spread a little too thin. The person who's always starting new initiatives, trying to improve the company, has the best intentions and the best heart in the matter. But because there's not so much follow through, the rest of the team is left trying to pick up the pieces and trying to put together some type of semblance of process that can really support everyone and to really make the company successful as a whole. Now, what's really interesting about this is that you might be able to rotate around some of the different roles, or you could insert, a different role in a certain place, but these characteristics are almost universalized across the different companies and teams that we've worked with. And there's really, in a couple of key points here, ways to address all of these different types of people. And that's really to get to the heart or the root of the matter of what's actually leading these people to become the way that they are.
Exactly. One of the first steps when you're looking at the people on the team is, of course, acknowledging, the immense amount of talent that they're often bringing, right? So that industry veteran is really bringing a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise, a lot of experience. That rigid office administrator or bookkeeper perhaps is bringing exactly that, a system and a process and a desire to really get things done. That company owner that's spread too thin is really often burning the midnight oil, bringing in a lot of dedication, ideas, again, knowledge and expertise. So you have to approach it from, of course, a place of strength. But when we think about how we can then help people to be more successful in terms of implementing ConstructionOnline or ConstructionSuite into the day-to-day business, we've seen a few approaches that work really well. And the first one is just for you and your team to define clear goals and objectives, to help your team see the bigger picture. So a lot of times when you're thinking of those individual team members, what they're really focused on is the day-to-day work or task of what they need to do. And less about big picture goals for the company or big picture targets that the company is trying to hit. And those could be targets related to things like growth. Those could be targets related to things like customer service and the way that you serve your customers. Those could be targets related to profitability. So there's all sorts of ways that can look for a company. Ideally, you should probably be looking at all of those things and then some. But having some clear goals and big picture objectives and then sharing those out with your team is an important first step.
Yeah, that's exactly right. When I think about this situation, Holly, everyone that's working inside of a company is on the same team. Whenever there's pushback from someone like, I'm thinking very clearly right now of the industry vet who's seen it all and done it all 20 times over at this point, and they stand up and they say, well, I don't see the point of, documenting the work on site because it's getting done. I'll just make a phone call. Why do I have to insert task that's different than anything they've done in the past year? Why do I have to upload photos? Why do I have to, type in my notes for the day? Well, the answer here is because beyond the small and selfish goal of just getting the work done on site, there's a bigger picture that person could be missing. They don't understand, or maybe they've never really experienced the pain on the other side of not having the documentation on hand when a claim is made on the job site or when something happens that goes wrong because they've handled it in the past, right? But giving a bigger picture goal and really helping everyone understand that this new initiative or this software that we're putting in place is really to help everyone on the team, including you, it goes a long way towards getting the buy-in and helping people get over that initial hurdle to trying something different.
Yeah, exactly. Part of that comes into really communicating for them what are the concrete benefits that I will see every day in my day-to-day job. So you might want to start by talking about things like ease of access to information, having everything in one place, no more phone calls back and forth constantly just trying to locate information. You may want to talk about Jordan, like with the reporting of job site is such a great example because there may be other parts at play there. We may want to talk about protecting the company with that documentation. I know many of you have begun to share out those daily logs and site photos with clients through the client portal. So if you think about, well, what's different? Because another common thing you might hear is, well, it's kind of just faster for me to do it the way I've always done. I could just write it down on a piece of paper, but that piece of paper won't protect the company. That piece of paper isn't available and visible for the rest of the team. That piece of paper isn't able to be shared with clients easily. So we kind of see our way through to the rest of the benefits that, the company and the customers will see there, as well as just, the benefits for me day to day. How's this going to make my job easier or my life better?
Yeah, and that really gets to the strategy that we offer for addressing the people problem in the company, which is really not thinking of your people as a problem, but setting your team up for success. You might assume, depending on your position in the company, that you are communicating that to your team, but unless you're actually doing the work and putting in the work of telling people how this new initiative or how this piece of software is going to help them in their day-to-day, they might not understand it. People aren't mind readers, and we can make assumptions all day long that people will just get it, but they won't. And we've seen it. People just won't get it. And that's nothing bad. It's because they're doing really important work day to day, and they just lack the ability to see the bigger picture sometimes because you've asked them to do something that is incredibly important and detail oriented and takes a lot of time and effort. Do the work, put in the work of communicating with your people, making sure that you all understand that you're working together, and the implementation factor will just come second nature to that once they understand exactly what benefits are in it for them and for the team, and really for the bigger pictures for your company as well.
Yeah, so there are a couple of other things that you can think about in terms of setting your team up for success. Before I talk about some of the things in ConstructionOnline that I think usually really help at this point, I'll also say this. When it comes to people and sort of the question of getting the team on board, what I've found from working with, again, so many people over the years is sometimes that question will come up or you'll say, well, how did you get your team on board? Or, what did you do to get your team on board? And so sometimes you'll get a reaction where people will say, well, we're not quite there yet, but, I've got such a team of good people, but, not everyone's just on board yet. And that always makes me think about, Jordan, one of my favorite quotes from a book that we've read here in the office and reference a lot it's a book called Good to Great, but the way the book opens is it says, good is the enemy of great. So I think about that in relation to, our really good people that we have on our team, probably really great people, but we've got good enough kind of processes in place without them getting on board. But think about that next level great that we really want to achieve as a team, and don't let your very deserved, respect of your colleagues get in the way of really challenging, your team to become a little bit better. I think the other thing too that I sometimes see in this situation is sometimes I'll get the opposite answer. I'll get someone who says, well, I don't know, we've just always used it. Like I said, this is what we were using. And so I told them, this is what we have to use now. This is what I've decided. And usually, of course, this is coming from a company owner who has a lot of backing, but it's not always as simple as just saying, okay, I've made a decision, now go. You have to provide those supports. But I do think it's important to provide some strong leadership and say, this is something we're doing as a company, so now I need everyone on board. Now, there's some practical things in ConstructionOnline that people can do to really make that happen. Jordan, what are some of your favorite things that you'll tell people to do to help get their team on board?
Well, when I first start thinking about larger team rollouts for ConstructionOnline, my mind immediately goes towards activities in the mobile app in a lot of ways. I think about the tasks of documenting work done on site and how easy that is to just let slip by for a day or two or three, which can really, really become a problem down the road because it's a habit that isn't formed. And you all of a sudden are in a situation 2 years down the line where you absolutely needed to see documentation or have some type of photo evidence that your team did the right thing that day, or that the person that you hired as a subcontractor to come and perform work on the job site, there's no record. Mm-hmm. There's no clear record, right? So when I think about how you can support your team and really equip them beyond the discussion of how it's going to benefit them, you can really set your team up for success with a couple of key reminders inside of ConstructionOnline. I think, of course, my mind is going to go directly to the daily logging feature, because I think this is where we'll start to find some slippage in adoption, is that people will have the best intentions to have their team start rolling information in from the field to say, here's what we did, boss, here's what we had going on for the day. But then, they'll get really busy, or some, fire will happen on another job site, and they'll forget to come back and put in their notes. So we put in the time to build in a very simple and smart reminder system, especially for daily logs, that lets you not only select the key people who should be reporting daily for a project, but also gives them a couple of different prompts for things like, well, what type of log should they be posting, right? Not in addition to a work log, maybe you want to make sure that they're commenting any other information that might have happened, maybe if they had a site meeting that day or something like that. You can set up the system so that if they have not posted a work log and other log types for the day, they'll be reminded to actually post that log. Of course, you can set it up so that it sends out a specific date and time. This is really great. It's a good safety net for your teams, especially when they're building new habits. Of course, this feature really comes into play inside of GamePlans as well, which does something a little similar. The GamePlans really give the extended team a really simple way to see everything that's on their plate for the day or for the week, whatever it might be. In addition to the positive reinforcement of concrete benefits about how, just taking a couple of extra actions inside of the platform can really benefit everyone, well, you can almost reward people with a simple and easy to understand list of key objectives. And for those people that are, go-getters, or for people who really just want to get the job done, this is a perfect tool for them, because it shows them, okay, well, what does that mean? What does the job look like? What are our expectations? And how can we execute against those expectations?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that reminders, not only in the daily logs, but for things like to-dos and schedules, can be so beneficial when setting your team up for success. I would say that project templates and estimate templates can also be, a really good way that you can help your team be set up for success, especially when you're looking at getting ConstructionOnline set up in the very beginning. A simple project template that keeps some consistency going can be really wonderful, give you things like a good structure for files and pictures, file and photo storage, a good structure for things like checklist and to-do lists, things that have to be done at the beginning of every project. And really, I know we'll talk about this a little bit more, Jordan, when we're looking at some of the process-driven things, but I think that anything you can sort of pre-set up for your team is really something that can help them a lot.
Yeah, it reduces the time and the effort that it takes to really commit to that initiative that you're trying to roll out for the team. And it helps even more if you have worked with your team to find out what is going to work well for them.
Exactly. Now, when we look at that next P, so if we think about those 3 Ps, we've got people, we've got process, and we've got priorities. So let's talk a little bit about process, because we see some really interesting things here as well. You often have a really wonderful team of people, and sometimes what we see is that there's not really a defined process. In fact, sometimes there's no process, maybe even because the people are talented and pretty good at what they do, so there's never really been a need to actually define the process. It's just kind of trusting in everyone's individual expertise. The problem with this is that is not scalable at all. It doesn't really lend itself to repeatable success. It doesn't handle change well if you have staffing changes at your company or need to add on a few more people. If the process is just either undefined or defined so loosely, kind of based on each individual's contribution without, again, thinking of that big picture, that can be a roadblock in terms of implementing ConstructionOnline or software, because a lot of what ConstructionOnline needs is for you to tell it what the process should be. You really want to have a process laid out that your team can repeat for success, and then we provide the engine really that's going to give you the power to do that.
And it's funny because that's on the one hand, you don't have that visible process that the team can really commit to. But on the other hand, we've encountered situations where there's such a commitment to a specific rigid set of items that absolutely have to happen every single time that it really limits the company from achieving, successful outcomes for the project, or really just successful outcomes from managing or running the business. Oftentimes we see that people are so committed to specific actions or specific tasks. This almost goes back in a way to the rigid office manager or bookkeeper in a way, right? That could be something that is an aspect of that person, or it could be that this system has been implemented and put in place inside of the company and hasn't been allowed to change or adapt or evolve over time.
Sometimes that comes back a little bit to kind of looking at that last point there, Jordan, that the process hasn't grown with the company. It's not unusual for companies to put in place a process that works well for them in the getting started stages, the early years. In fact, we were talking to one of our wonderful customers, stopped by the office today and told us, he told me that when he was getting started, that the first couple of years were kind of like a blur. He's like, man, those first couple of years were just a blur, which makes a lot of sense, right? There's a lot of work happening behind launching and getting a business off the ground, and the processes that define what you're doing maybe in that first couple of years will look and need to look different as your company begins to grow, or maybe take on different types of projects, or again, adding those additional team members will often really change what that day-to-day process needs to look like. The other thing I would say about process as you're thinking about and evaluating that for your company is 2 additional things. One is it doesn't have to be complicated. The goal here isn't to outline something that is so complicated or intimidating. If you think about sitting down with your team or just sitting down and writing out, your process, the goal isn't for it to be so complex. You want it to be an executable recipe for success. So again, start high level, start documenting some things down, get that into ConstructionOnline, and let ConstructionOnline support you and your team in carrying out that process. And then I think, the other thing I would say here, and again, I love this subject because I see so many of those aha moments or turning points where I'm working with a client and it's like, whoa, okay, yeah, that's That is exactly what's happening here. So one of the things I would also say about process is, make sure that the process isn't put in place just to support some of the objections that you might hear. Common things that we sometimes hear are things like, well, I'm just not tech savvy, or maybe I'm worried I'm going to mess something up in a software platform, or, well, I've always done it this way. So kind of when you're looking at that process, think about executing for success, not necessarily just what you've always done.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We mentioned some key ways to address the process. Well, for those of you who don't have a very visible process built out inside of ConstructionOnline, or if you're using ConstructionSuite, there are quite a few different ways that you can build out that process, whether you're looking at using the checklist or punch list function, or whether you're looking at finally sitting down and establishing a dynamic schedule within the platforms. Do the work to build out the process and make it visible for the entire team. And secondly, for those who are working with a rigid process in the company that has given success in the past, right? We'll go back to this idea that good sometimes is the enemy of great. A lot of times people will lose sight of the outcomes and the results that they want from their processes in their company, and they'll commit to having this exact document this exact way. It has to look this way because it's looked this way for 20 years, and we wouldn't be here as a company if we didn't have this one little piece to the left 3 pixels. I mean, we laugh at this in some cases, but this becomes a sticking point for companies to actually, adopting software. But it's because everyone loses sight sometimes of the goal or the outcome that they're looking for, because, well, they've kind of chiseled away at the process that they used to use for their company, and now they think they've got it, and they think, well, if we just stick to this one way of being, or this one way of performing, everything will be perfect. But that's not how life works. That's not how nature works. That's not how business works, right? Things change. Situations change. I mean, I've worked with companies where certain aspects of their business haven't changed since the 90s at this point, which doesn't make any sense. This was, before the iPhone, which everyone uses, or before smartphones, which everyone uses on a job site now. How is it possible for you to be a successful business when your competition is out there continually growing and improving, and you're fixated on making sure that you can still fax somebody?
Yeah, exactly. There's some interesting challenges that kind of surround some of that evolution sometimes. But I think it really does come down to, okay, we need to think about the results that we want from our process, and not, fixate or focus too much on the steps. You want the steps to be there and be a support, but the driving focus should at all times really be the outcome, the result that you want. Now, when we think about establishing that great process within ConstructionOnline, some of the tips, Jordan, that you and I, would offer to people, I know one you mentioned is probably one of my favorites, is the checklist. I love the checklist and punch list. I think they are great tools to use for just quickly outlining a process. And one of the best things about these as well is that they can be built into your project templates that I just mentioned. So for example, in my project template, I have a project startup checklist for my clients and a startup checklist for my trade partners. You might have startup checklists for other administrative tasks that you like to do in the beginning of a job. You might have a handoff checklist where the checklist is going, where that project moves from the planning or design team to actual production or construction. I've seen a lot of teams do some really cool things from a handoff perspective. And of course, you would have checklists to address things like safety inspections or milestone inspections as the project is moving along, or like a final closeout there. So these are really wonderful because you can template these out and enter them into ConstructionOnline one time. And that's it. You enter it once, then use your project templates. These checklists will automatically populate every time you create a new job. And so it really goes back to not only establishing this process, but now we've set our team up for success to be able to execute on that. I mean, really, they just have to come in at this point and be able to, check these items off. That progress is then visible to everyone. Jordan, what else would you recommend from a process standpoint if a company comes in and really thinks about the process that they're defining what other tools within Construction Online are your go-tos for helping people get set up.
Well, this one is I think almost counterintuitive because there's no check marks or checklists involved, but I almost always recommend scaffolding out and building out a really robust file and album structure inside of a project. For those of you who have attended other webinars in the past where I've kind of covered the file system, I think this is an underrated tool for really helping your teams understand where certain information should belong or where it should live, and also where to find that information in the future as well. This is part of a process of information and knowledge management inside of a company that is all too easy to let go or let slip by the wayside, but they can really have drastic results on improving a company's management of a project simply by knowing where everything should be and making sure that that information lands in its designated place every single time. There's a lot of ways you can set this up in Construction Online to work well for all of your teams. And it's so accessible after the fact. Once you've set up this folder structure, this is accessible from the web, from the mobile app, from our desktop application, Construction Online Drive. Really, the benefits extend outwards from what seems like a simple task. Now, so one other element of process that seems to fall by the wayside as companies are growing and improving is really going back and evaluating what's working well and what isn't working well. There are plenty of different reports and tools and metrics to track inside of Construction Online to make sure that you're executing well and executing in a timely fashion on your processes. But I feel like a lot of companies do not prioritize the post-mortem of a project or reviewing exactly how did we function compared to how we expected to perform on this project.
Yeah, exactly. And I think two of the things that I would recommend taking a look at there is one, within your financials, doing like an estimate versus actual report so you can really see how that project budget played out in the end. And really it's helpful to do that throughout the project as it's progressing along for sure. But if we're thinking about that end of project closeout or evaluation of how we did, the estimate versus actual report is a really great one to look at. Another place where I think people should look is, two other places. One would be, take a look at the schedule, see where you finished in relation to where you thought you would finish. And some of the other reports from a punch list perspective or rework, quality assurance, that sort of thing. And those will often, show themselves in the financial reports too when you're looking at things like, places where you went over budget because rework had to be done. So a lot of times the financial reports and over budget or an estimate versus actual will help shine the spotlight on what areas need your attention. And then you can use the other tools and reports to dive in and really see, kind of figure out what happened or what led to that. Now, the last P for us, here today is priority. So we've talked a little bit about, people. We've talked about your process, and there's really so much to dive into and cover there. But one of the things that comes into play and affects both of those is priorities. And so sometimes we do hear from teams who just say, it's kind of ironic, right? It's like a bad joke or something. Well, I'm too busy for time management, or we're too busy to learn something new, or, fill in the blank, right?
Exactly. But all of this, what you're hearing is really communicating outwards. We didn't prioritize insert blank here, right? It's not that you ran out of time. It's that other things took over in terms of the priorities for your daily, allotment of activity, which really is so detrimental to actually implementing software that can save you time. It really is a bad joke or a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. We work with plenty of teams all the time that tell us, well, we're really looking to speed up the process of completing a project, or we want to make it more efficient to get documentation on time, or we want to really improve things about our business. So they come in with the best of intentions, they get their team on board with this new initiative, and then something happens. It's like they make it over the hurdle and they say, yes, we did it. We purchased the Construction Online subscription. And then they lose sight of that priority, which was using the tool to the fullest capabilities to really give themselves and their team more time and space to improve and grow as a team and as a company, and to become wildly more successful than when they first started.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, some of the recommendations we would have are big picture and some are a little bit more practical, but, I think it really does come back to something we talked about earlier, Jordan, is, understanding what it is that you want to achieve, so that you can keep your eye on the big picture for the company. If you have that as a goal or a beacon, it does make it a little bit easier to prioritize, or even for some people justify, doing things like continuous learning for ConstructionOnline, or, taking a little bit of time to learn something new for sure. And thinking about the ways in which investing in ConstructionOnline will actually give you more time. What we see a lot of times with companies as they first get started is there's sometimes a little hump as, existing data is being migrated over into ConstructionOnline and everybody on the team is getting used to using it. And then we'll talk to them, 6 months down the road, and, we haven't talked in a while, and they're like, well, that's because we haven't needed to talk to you. Things are going so well. We have so much extra time. We actually took on two more jobs. Like, you hear all sorts of wonderful things. So it's good to kind of keep those end goals in mind. And I think the other thing that you would want to do here is make sure that you do take advantage of ongoing training and support for a couple of reasons. One is because it's wonderful to have support and training and guidance when you're looking to start something new or wanting to expand, your use of ConstructionOnline. We're here for you to support your success. But I've also found that doing that a lot of times does keep teams accountable or help them feel like that it's good. If they know they're having a training session with me next week on Thursday, then everybody on the team's a little bit more likely to kind of go in and get their stuff done. So sometimes in the beginning it can help with accountability as well.
Yeah, I found the very similar result as well, Holly. If a team knows that we have a follow-up meeting scheduled the next week to review or make sure that they don't have any questions for insert initiative here, right? They're more likely to get it done and not let it fall by the wayside or let excuses come into play. Like, well, I could have worked on building out and refining our process checklist templates, but instead of doing that, I was actually doing the work. Well, that's completely missing the point. We've designed our systems and our software to return disproportionately time back to companies that put time into the system, legitimately anywhere in the platform. This is something that we chuckle about quite often. How does ConstructionOnline make teams more efficient and more effective overall? Well, it's not like we're going to make a system or design a tool for a company that is going to take away more time than it takes to put into the system. And we found that time and again, companies have this epiphany. People have this epiphany that, oh, wow, well, if we actually did commit to using the system and getting our team on board, it actually worked for us. And it all comes back to this idea of making the build out and the implementation of the software a true priority. You can have a star-studded team that is open to change, that is open to improvement, and that really is all on board with your big picture goals and priorities. You can have the best, most refined and evolving and dynamically updating process in the world, but if you don't prioritize those items and really bring them together inside of a project management platform, it's not going to work. And so really, this last point here is the most important. It's too easy to fall into the trap of busy and to stay moving forward with that semblance of progress that you've always had. But eventually you're going to run into competition or someone who has prioritized better than you. And if you haven't spent the time to prioritize and really make growth an initiative for your company and make continual improvement and continual training and education a priority for yourself first and for your team second, you're going to lose. There's no way you can win because they've become more efficient than you, they're more effective than you. And that doesn't have to be the case. You can start today.
That's right. You definitely can. And I think there's a little bit of a balance there, right? Because hopefully busy is usually going to be the case. I mean, that's kind of what we want. I always think of busy as a good thing, so I think, you want to some days you'll need to give yourself a break or give your team a break. That's fine. Those days are definitely going to happen. But just general busyness isn't really enough not to prioritize the bigger picture goals that you and your company and colleagues have set. Hopefully, you're going to be busy a lot, and so the goal is to again put those people and processes in place that are going to support that busyness. Now, as we sort of come to the end here, this would be a great time. We'll go ahead and answer some questions before we wrap up. So if anyone has questions for me and Jordan that you'd like us to go ahead and answer for you, please feel free to send those over. We do have a great question from someone in the audience earlier today that I want to go ahead and address those. So sort of asking, but what do we prioritize? So from a priority standpoint, if you're looking at ConstructionOnline, what should be prioritized? And so Jordan, I will I know you'll have some interesting insight here, and I think how I would answer that question is to say, well, first you would want to ask, what things are most important to you, or what things are most important, to your company, kind of going back to those goals. But I would say as well, don't try to prioritize everything at once. Like, my answer is less specific than saying, well, of course, everyone prioritizes scheduling first thing, because that's not really how it works. Every company definitely, is unique. But I think I would say prioritize the few things that are most important to you, really get your team and everybody on board with that, and then come back to some of those lesser priority items, later on down the road.
Yeah, I advocate a two-pronged approach to this, especially when I'm working with companies that are just starting with ConstructionOnline. I end up working with quite a few companies in that position. And, there's really a two-pronged approach that I recommend. The first one is to pick a very large, ongoing task, something that is probably going to experience a lot of resistance internally first, and pairing that with something that can return immediate results. Something very simple, like setting up a file and folder structure, or setting up a practice of daily logging, or just getting people to upload one picture from the job site a day. That way that you're seeing two returns on your investment. You have something that's happening very quickly, so that your team can start really seeing the benefits right away of a new software implementation, and pairing that with something that it takes a little bit longer to implement, like maybe redesigning or restructuring your item code so that your bookkeeping and estimating teams are on the same page. That's going to take a bit of time, and it's going to lead to a bit of friction inside of the company that you can't just solve right away, and it might even lead to, at first, some uncomfortable situations and conversations. But I think that that's a really easy way to achieve some quick wins up front, while building towards that bigger picture priority or true return on investment down the road as well. And it keeps quite a few people happy, right? Especially if you're in the position in the company where you're not the company owner, but you're still trying to drive initiatives and drive growth in the company. Well, you can have a small win in your pocket while still building towards a bigger and better future.
Absolutely. Now, it looks like we have got some fun questions coming today, but here's one that we hear a lot, so we'll go ahead and jump in and answer this one as well, Jordan. So this question is, kind of related to something we mentioned earlier about those team members that are just not tech savvy, or, what is the best way to help team members who are just not tech savvy? And so I think I've got a few suggestions that I would offer here. I mean, one is, to ask kind of the question is, what do you mean not tech savvy? Because we do hear that sometimes, and sometimes it just means that the person, doesn't have experience using like a formal software system, but are perfectly comfortable with all sorts of other technology, which is a little bit different than someone who, maybe kind of sometimes it's a generational thing, but, maybe someone that's not using a smartphone quite as much, or just has less experience using technology and computers. So I think you kind of have to start by just looking at, what that means or what it looks like. And I think there's all sorts of ways that you can, support that. I mean, part of it is, of course, offering encouragement and training. And I think I love your idea about the pictures, Jordan, because sometimes it's just starting small, like just use the app to take photos and that's it. Can be an easy way to start. One thing I found about ConstructionOnline that's really nice is that once you learn how to do one thing, the other features, even though they're functioning differently, so they're achieving different results, kind of the way that you interact with ConstructionOnline is pretty similar. Once you learn how to enter a to-do list item in, then it's a lot easier to come back and know pretty intuitively how to make punch list items or how to enter daily logs, or everything is, you interact with it the same way. So I would, again, going back to maybe picking an area of focus is one of the best ways, I think, to support those team members that just need to build a little confidence, perhaps.
Yeah, Holly, this idea or this belief is really frustrating to me. Whenever somebody tells me that they're not tech savvy, or they're not great with software, or they're not great with technology, whatever the case may be, it's such an excuse. It's such just a flawed belief that it almost becomes my personal mission in a way to convince them that that's not true. Because it's not. It's not something that can be true, right? Because here's the thing. No one starts in the world, whenever they're born, knowing how to use software. This is a learned skill. And just like any learned skill, this one's even easier because there's not really, in a lot of cases, a physical element involved with it. It's not like you can get tired. I mean, your eyes might get a little fatigued. But this all comes back to belief in yourself, or belief that you can. And this is the easiest thing in the world to do. You just need little wins, little successes, right? The example you gave, or just borrowed again, Holly, of uploading a picture, one picture, has such a huge transformation or a huge change. I hear people say all the time, well, I work with some guys on our team and they're old dogs, they can't learn new tricks. It's just not true. It's not true at all. I've seen it hundreds and hundreds of times that's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And if you commit to it, or if you reinforce it by accepting the excuse, you're only making it worse for yourself and for your team moving forward. Don't accept it. Don't accept it. That's the easiest way to overcome this challenge. Is just to not accept it, but in an encouraging way. Mm-hmm. To trick people in a way, to say, well, is that really true? Are you sure about that? Oh yeah, you've never encountered someone like me, like I'm the worst, Really? I doubt that, right? There's plenty of ways that you can encourage your team that they're not the worst at using software. And it really it's the tiniest amount of encouragement. You would be so surprised if you're working with someone that says, I'm just bad at this. If you can just turn around and say, well, no, you're not. Come on, let's work together. You'd be surprised at how disproportionate of an impact that will have on their day and later on their life. And I can say that from experience.
I think that's a great place for us to end, Jordan. I do. So with that, as we're running out of time here, we do want to thank everyone for attending today. One final thing that I would say is our goal is your success. So when we, want to talk today about, common objections or challenges that you might have and offer some practical solutions. But one of those practical solutions is work with us. Your subscription includes, unlimited training and support. Both Jordan and myself, along with the rest of our product specialist team here, we really love working with you guys. We are happy to have conversations with you about training, and we're also happy to have conversations with you about, the best way to help some of your team members get on board. So we have a lot of enthusiasm and drive to help you guys be successful. So it's really, you're the reason for our work. So if anyone wants to schedule some time, either with myself or Jordan or any other product specialist here at UDA, please just give us a call. We're here at 800-700-8321. Ask for either of us, or just ask to schedule an appointment. So we'd love to work with you. We do have some additional webinars coming up over the next couple of weeks. We will be highlighting some new features. So we have, we'll be doing some feature spotlights, introducing new customizable tax settings for ConstructionOnline estimates and financials, as well as giving you a first look at the brand new Envoy chat channel. So some really outstanding new features. Can't wait to show you guys how to use those. So hope you can join us for some of those other sessions. Until then, thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, everyone. We truly appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll be speaking with you soon. Until next time, take care.